Thanks, Tito. Boa. It's great to be back in University of South Pacific. I was here in April and I was collaborating with two colleagues from Monash University. Some of you met Lynn and Leanne, and we're collaborating especially with the team who teach UU 104, 100, 104, sorry, 1114, 204, 200. And so we've got, after this, we've got Rajni Chand and Shalin Singh will be representing UU 100 and UU 114 because of the results of the collaborations that you'll see. So what I'm going to address just in a few minutes, we're going to take about 5 minutes each, to answer this question: what happens when academics collaborate on research skill development in courses and degree programs? So I'm going to answer that almost immediately because we've been able to, over the course of a number of years, interview students about a year after they've completed a course and more recently a degree program that explicitly and coherently developed their research skills. And so this student, who was from Monash University, had actually graduated from his degree, but he had done a course that explicitly and coherently developed his research skills in the context of business ethics. And this student said, I know that research is important, not only from an educational perspective, but if I'm in a work situation, it's just basically understanding what I want to achieve in my role with my customer and how I actually go about breaking that down into manageable, easy steps. So yes, it's got a practical application in my world, in what I do. And this was not a comment that was rare, but this is something that many students in different contexts, different disciplines, we interviewed students from 6 different disciplines representing different faculty groupings, and this is the most common sort of thing they said. When we explicitly develop research skills, they didn't see them to be isolated, esoteric things that only occur in university. Almost the opposite. They saw them very practical, employment-orientated, and outside of university life-orientated skills. Another element is another student from a different context, in this case medical science, said I've used these skills for my other subjects as well. I still use the same techniques to evaluate the research that I do. And this degree of transfer was also not an expected one. I think transfer of skills is often difficult and awkward, but students were recognising that if they're actually using evaluative skills in one context, that they need to evaluate other research outputs of different types in other contexts. So there was quite a large proportion of students who were also indicating that sort of thing. Now, for your interest, it might be good for you to know that the Research Skill Development Framework has frames a number of different disciplines, and I'll be meeting with the 3 different faculties, especially with heads of school in some contexts and other staff in other contexts. But there is a wide diversity of disciplines and resources that have been developed that are all share alike commons resources. So as Gito said, it started at University of Adelaide. We've had 4 partner universities, especially Monash has been a rich partner. And then things have spread out over the years until we're here in the University of South Pacific. So Monash has been a partner that's been using the RSD since 2007. Now, not unlike USP, in recent times they decided to make this part of their strategic plan. They're going to embed the Research Skill Development Framework across all faculties, and down the bottom, so first of all across undergraduate degrees, they'll be thinking more about postgraduate and including PhD supervision, because the framework is being used in all those contexts. So basically, I'm not going to try to explain the framework, but there are 6 different angles of the one precious jewel of research. So there's one gem, and we say there's 6 facets. The first one is the students have to embark and they have to clarify what they're doing. They have to find relevant information and or generate data. They have to evaluate information and data and reflect on the process. They have to organise that information and manage the research process, including managing of teams. They have to analyse all that data and looking for trends. The complex task of synthesising, and they have to communicate and apply. So they're the 6 facets of the RSD. You've got a little A3 handout with the more detailed version on one side and then the blanked out version on the other side. So down the left-hand column, you'll see these 6 facets and some of the details. If we get into, we're determined to have a Q&A session and leave time for that, so you might ask some questions about the framework itself. But this is an example of when students actually use, are informed by academics and teachers who are framing their research skills very explicitly. These are honours students who are not only producing electronic engineering related artefacts and presenting them, but they're presenting them and communicating them, in this case to a school group that happens to be wandering through a forum that they do for presentations. And in this process, electronic engineering decided 3 years ago that it would actually frame that 4th year with the research skill development framework. So the whole process was very clear and explicit to honours, because even though in that 4th year context, it often hasn't been the case. Now, medical science, on the other hand, has been using research skill development in 1st year since 2005. And in more recent times, there's been a bigger level of interest in using RSD to frame honours in that school, partly informed by electronic engineering. So when academics collaborate, you would get schools talking to other schools about what they're doing, using the same information, using the same language to communicate what they're doing. So now medical science, who started things off, is now following electronic engineering use of honours. And we started interviewing students at the end of their degree program. So this student has actually done 4 years of an undergraduate degree when we interviewed this student, and said, so since the beginning of the degree, way back in 1st year, they have given us assignments based on this RSD criteria. You might not have liked the assignments, but because you have been consistently applying this structure to all of our assignments, we have come to think that way for science, in the perspective of science and writing. You might not know that you're following their guidelines, but you are. But it's the sort of idea that Sally was talking about this morning when she gave an example from psychology, that if you get this ongoing cyclic development over years, people, academics in different courses speaking the same language, then you get this cyclic development where you're actually immersed in the discipline, understanding explicitly and then implicitly what to do. So it looks like this. When you're revisiting the same skills in a whole variety of contexts, different academics, with increasing degrees of rigour and conceptual demand over years, you've got these 6 facets spiralling around. So you're developing these 6 facets in the 1st year of their degree. You're continuing to develop them more richly, more nuanced, with a higher degree of rigour, higher degree of conceptual load, same skills maturing, developing in different contexts, and throughout the degree. And I think that's what Gito is really talking about for University of South Pacific, is that there's that potential for a framework in common. It's not a framework that will lock you in to one prescribed set of action. It's a framework that allows communication and collaboration. So not only between academic to academic, but with tutors, with a library, with the academic language and learning support, with IT people. Give a language in common. So just a few different samples of what that looks like. Monash, for example, has mapped out in pharmacy exactly what their research skill looked like according to the RSD. So to blow that up a bit bigger, the top one is the 1st facet of the RSD, and they've looked at specific details of that. They map out if it's being taught or if it's assessed, and they're sort of looking across the whole degree program for pharmacy. How well this is being done, and are there holes? Are there things that need to be more richly developed? Another approach is from Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin in psychology, where if you turn the framework 90 degrees, you'll notice on your framework now, because 90 degrees text is the affective domain. So we had our colleague speaking on the affective domain. The framework is primarily, you could say, a cognitive and psychomotor framework, but we explicitly represent the affective domain because it is a critical component. We don't necessarily go for the assessment of it necessarily, unless that's really relevant in your context, but to make the affect, the motivations and drivers explicit to students, we're finding is very, very important. And some people use this as kind of the handles or the labels they use with students. And another different take is from business, a skills self-audit. So students are aware of what the framework's like, not necessarily the first or second or third or fourth time, but becoming increasingly aware of the facets of the things we're expecting in our context and beginning to be able to do rigorous self-assessment, not sloppy slapdash self-assessment. There's a big difference between the two. And then we're going to actually have, Rajni is going to come up and represent Science U114. And this framework that all the UUs developed is one that's quite common with the 6 facets. I'm not sure if you can see the laser, but the 6 facets of the RSD and here. And then the discipline-specific and assignment-specific details that are in the cells that relate directly to the assignment. That's a very common and standard use of the RSD. And so I'm going to ask Rajni to come up and just to talk to us about what it looked like when they were going about designing and what actually the outcomes have been, because they've been actually applying that this semester. So we've got some actual outcomes from students.